Hey guys, it's Alexis, aka The Sloth Reader, and I'm here today to do a video kind of just about my reading story. I just decided to kind of just, I'm almost 23 years old. I decided to just kind of chronicle reading and how it shaped my life and, kind of when I've discovered reading and everything like that. So I just wanted to give you guys like my reading story. I just thought that would be an interesting thing to give you guys some information about me as a reader. So yeah, so get ready for me to condense 23 years worth of stuff into 10 minutes. So I was not one of those kids who came out of the womb wanting to read. That wasn't me. I learned to read with my mother. My mother had picture books and she just, would put them in front of me and have me read. I think that's how a lot of us learn to read. And I'll never forget the first book I actually learned to read was one of those Disney adaptation picture books, and it was of A Bug's Life. And if I can somehow find a picture of the actual book, I'll put it up. But that was the first book I ever remember being able to read. Looking over at my mom and being like, I can read the words, I understand what these words mean and stuff. But that wasn't the start of reading for me. I never read for about the first, from that point on until I was about 9 or 10 years old. I loved to read things in terms of signs. If I was in the car with my grandparents or my mom, I would love to read signs. Every sign I came across I wanted to read. I wanted people to know I could read it, but I never enjoyed reading books. Books weren't something that held my attention. I didn't find anything that totally captivated me until I was in the 4th grade, so until I was about 10 years old. And I have to credit a girl I was good friends with back then. Her name was Hannah. So if you ever stumble across my video, just know that you totally inspired me to be a reader. I used to hang out with Hannah all the time. My mom would drop me off for play dates at her house, and she loved to read. She had read all of the Harry Potter books up to that point, and anytime you looked at her, she had her nose in a book. And so when I would go over to her house, all she would want to do was read. I would want to watch TV or play games, but she wanted to read. And I'll never forget one of the times I was over at her house, she was reading and I was like, Hannah, I'm super bored, can we do something? And no kidding, she walked over to her bookshelf. She took a random book off of the shelf and she basically gave it to me and she said, if you're bored, you can read. She said, because reading is what I do for fun. She's like, and I'm not going to stop reading because you're bored. And so I don't remember what the book she handed me was. It wasn't anything life-changing. It was probably just something she had on her shelf. But I remembered I sat there with her that day and I read the first couple of chapters. Even now I'm not a very fast reader and I certainly wasn't then. So I just sat that evening and read with her. And that was kind of the beginning of everything for me. It made me so much more interested in reading. And so when I was in that same year, we had a library book thing. It wasn't a Scholastic book fair, but I will totally come to that in a minute. This was more, I remember us all sitting in the library and we watched on a TV, and it had a VHS player. We watched a book trailer. I'm serious. We watched a book trailer for the first book in the Land of Elion series by Patrick Carman, which is The Dark Hills Divide. And we watched a book trailer for this book. And I remember thinking, that sounds like such an amazing story. And I think the first book I had checked out from the library and I had read it and I loved it. And this was the first book series that I felt enraptured by as a 10-year-old. I read this book series and I loved it. And every year when a new book would come out in this series, I had to buy it that day it came out. And this was the only series up until I was maybe 13 or so that I followed consecutively as books were coming out. I would make my mom take me to the store to buy a book. But a little bit of a rewind, when I was in the 5th grade, I remember we had to buy, school books that we had read during the school year. And I remember my mom took me to the store and they had a table with all of the required reading books for the schools in the area. And we only had to pick 2 books off of this list. And I remember asking my mom if she would buy me more than 2 of the books on that list. And I remember my mom turning to me and my mom going, are you gonna read it? And I was like, yeah. I was like, I want to read these books. And I'll never forget, my mom seemed so surprised because up until that point, I had never wanted to read. I had never asked her to spend money on books. I always had asked her to spend money on toys. and, you know, games for my Game Boy. So, you know, I'll never forget, she turned to me and she was like, "You really want me to buy you books?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's what I want you to do." And that set the tone for me for the next, you know, 13 years. I mentioned Scholastic Book Fairs. I don't know if they do those outside of the US, but honestly, I feel so bad for people who don't get to experience how magical Scholastic Book Fairs are. I'll see if I can find pictures, but basically a Scholastic Book Fair is that once a school year, Scholastic, the printing company, would come into schools in the library, or sometimes it was like in an auditorium, and they basically would just set up a book fair. So they would have books of, or reading levels around the ages of the kids in the school. They'd also have arts and crafts and a couple of toys, but the focus was always on reading, was always on wanting kids to buy books for reading. And every year when the Scholastic Book Fair would come, I would ask my mom, I'd be like, "Mom, can I just have $20 this week just to buy books?" And that was something I would do up until I was in high school and we didn't have Scholastic Book Fairs anymore. But I mean, I became just, I wanted to devour books. And so when I was in middle school, where my parents live and still currently live is not even a 5-minute walk from a big box bookstore, Books A Million. And so I would go there every week and I would buy books. And it wasn't always, you know, a thick, clunky book. During that period, I bought a lot of comic books and a lot of manga, which is still something I'm very passionate about as a reader. But, you know, I still bought regular books during that time too, and I built up, you know, a 2-bookshelf collection. Many of those books I still have on my shelves now that I had purchased when I was in middle school, when I would go to the bookstore on the weekends with my friends, and I would spend, you know, my mom would give me money for the weekend and the whole thing would go to buying books because that's what I wanted. Obviously the book buying is not something that I have grown out of. Now I just spend my money instead of my mother and father's money. So, whoops. So, that's a bad habit that I have not grown out of, clearly. But so I just, you know, and I just built up a collection of books. And I would continue to be a very, very strong reader up until I graduated high school. And 2 of my very, very, very best friends in the world, my friend Erica and my friend Ashley, both of them I became so heavily bonded with over books. Books brought me 2 of my best friends in this entire world, and 2 people that I love to death. Books brought them to me, and I actually have a video coming up about books that are special to me for reasons that I'll talk a little bit more about that in. But yeah, so in high school I read, and I talked about books with my friends, and we recommended books to each other, and there were so many books in my group of friends when I was in high school that we read together that I'm very nostalgic for. I mentioned a lot of times Vampire Academy is like that we read them all together, and, you know, we had fun discussing them. And so yeah, so like books in high school to me were a lifeline between me and my friends, and I'm so thankful for that. Now, when I got to college, my first year in college, I didn't bring anything with me because I was living in a dorm room, and so I didn't have any books with me. I had my like my Kindle program on my iPad, but I didn't really read much that first year. My first semester, particularly in college, for me was very rough, which is hilarious because like I started rough and I ended rough. But my first semester of college for me was very rough. I didn't really have many friends my first semester in college, and I actually spent a lot of time coming home on the weekends. I spent nearly every weekend driving 4 hours to be with my parents, which in hindsight was something I should never have allowed myself to do, but I still did. So my first year in college was really rough, and I didn't really read much in that time frame. It didn't help that my first semester in college I was heavily depressed. I was very, very depressed. That was the height of my period of dealing with depression, and so I didn't want to read. I never found myself desiring to read during that time period, which if you guys know, that's usually a huge symptom of depression, is not wanting to do the things that bring you joy. So I very much experienced that. And in my second year of college, I was still very, very much depressed that second year. But that second year, I actually found out I was diagnosed with PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, which I can film an entire video just about my physical and mental illnesses if you guys want me to. But so anyway, so I discovered that that was a leading cause, I think, of why I was so depressed. And so that year, my sophomore year, I had gotten on medication to deal with my PCOS. And in doing so, I did overcome my depression in that way. And it's funny because where I was going to school, there's a secondhand bookstore there that you can get books for 50 cents, you know, sometimes all the way up to $10. And I had like rediscovered my love for reading. I spent every chance I could there buying books, and I only bought maybe that entire year, maybe 20 books. But it was still like a reawakening of my passion for reading. That year for me was such an end of a dark period, and I just came out of it and I wanted to read. I wanted to experience reading in all of its beauty and all of its glory. And just in those 2 years that I had spent not reading, I had missed out on so many books and so many releases. And so I discovered I had all of this catching up to do, and I'm still trying to catch up on a lot of stuff that came out during that time period, that was popular during that time period. But that was kind of this new start over in reading for me. And from that point on until where I am now, that's pretty much where I've been, is just I want to read. Reading is something that makes me happy. Reading is something that's always made me happy. And even if I haven't necessarily always done it, it's still something I love. It's still something I would love to share with everyone else. And I hope everyone in this world can get to experience how beautiful reading is, because I know how beautiful it's been to me. And so here I am now with a lot of books. I'm already at the point where I need to buy another bookshelf because I have so many books. But, you know, just looking at my bookshelves makes me incredibly happy. Just looking at some of the amazing stories I have dove into, and just knowing that through, you know, having a channel, I can recommend some of my favorite stories to you guys, and you guys can get a chance to experience them. And I just think that that's supremely magical. So anyway, I just have been thinking about this a lot lately, just thinking about like the different times in my life when reading has been there, or when I've given it up and then I've rediscovered it. And so I just thought I would make a video and I would share it with you guys. I would love to hear you guys' reading stories. I think it would be really cool if, you know, we could get everybody filming videos that tell us all of our reading stories, you know. I'm not necessarily saying making it a tag, but if you guys would love to film your own reading stories videos and you'd love to share them with me, I would love, love, love to watch them. Or if you guys just want to tell me in the comments below, I'd love that too. And I will see you guys soon with another video. Bye!